the Elizabethan age, it has been called a young age, like you all students are young. Elizabethan age has well been called a young age. It was put now. What were the special features? Why it was so special? This age for literature, it was full of boundless vigor. This age is also characterized by a reawakening of intellectual pursuit. I'm talking very slowly so that it can go to you in a very particular way, or you should keep something in your mind. Besides, Elizabethan age is also marked by soaring imagination. The best fruits of the age are reflected in poetry, in which all these elements can be seen in a harmonious combination. In poetry, there are restrictions of versification. You know, is tarah likhna hai. So in poetry, there are restrictions of versification which exerted some check or control on the youthful imagination and vigor of the Elizabethans. Consequently, Elizabethan poetry is considered or labeled great. But Elizabethan prose also deserves appreciation because of several reasons. So Elizabethan period is known popularly for its drama and poetry, but we can't neglect the prose. It is also important. Now let us in brief discuss the position of something some in the society. What was that time what was going on in the English society? Let us talk about culture. Elizabeth's reign not only sealed the emergence of England as a great power on the European scene, it was characterized. Please mute yourself, Pooja Priya. Mute. Elizabeth's reign not only sealed the emergence of England as a great power on the European scene, it was characterized by great cultural development, which has gone down in the history as Elizabethan. The heyday of education in all social classes made that culture grew rapidly in this period. This blooming occurred in literature. Blooming, you know, khilna, prasfutan hona. Occurred in the literature, mainly in the theatre, especially William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Dekker, John Lilly, and others. Now, coming to the education part, what was the plight of education at that time? Children would be taught at home. Just before the Elizabethan period, children would be taught at home. The basic principles of childhood education would be basic elements, such as, you know, that we often say that home is the first school, parents are the first teachers. In the same way, children would be taught at home. The basic principles of childhood education would be basic elements, such as respecting their mother and father, asking their parents blessings on the basic etiquette of proper manners. Boys attended to grammar schools. Those who take the pains while going through the history book, you see he was sent to this grammar school, that grammar school. So grammar schools were very famous in those days. In the name of schools, grammar was attached. So boys attended to grammar school. After grammar schools, they continued their education at university when they were only 14. On the other hand, girls were rarely allowed in any place of education. So you know that I am often against patriarchy. What is patriarchy?
Society which is dominated by male.
Yes. When the men, the father, brothers, husbands, sons, they all try to control the lives of women. That is patriarchy. So not only in India, we are still suffering. In England also, patriarchy was there, and Girls were rarely allowed in any place of education. In our society, you can still see, even if the son is not very intelligent, he is sent to a good school, to a public school. I have seen in my neighbors. And even the girl is very intelligent, she is sent to a government school, that we don't have to spend a lot on her education. What is the use of it? She has to go to somebody else's house. So it was the same. Girls were rarely allowed in any place of education. Only the most wealthy people, very rich people, they allowed their daughters to be taught. Students' education was based on reading and writing in English, learning about religion, and also learning lessons in behavior. See, this is very important. Learning lessons in behavior, our students also need it. Some of my students are very intelligent, very well behaved, but the bigger part, the greater part, just a couple of days back, a degree one student of your batch who is not attending, I won't name him, at 9:30 he calls me, introduces himself. I am a student of CM college. I asked, so what? Degree 2 का admission madam हो रहा है. Then I asked him that education also teaches you to ask the right question at the right place. Teachers are here only to give you lessons in your subject or to make clear if you have any confusion in your course. These are office matters. Is the government a fool paying so many clerks, having office in the college? So behavior. And there is a time students will often ask, ma'am, aaj class hoga? This is not expected from students of, especially of English honors. You should learn how to behave in public with teachers, with fellow students. So in that time also, it was taught how to behave. During this time, schooling became available during Elizabethan period. So this was the benefit. This time, schooling became available even for children of very poor families if they did not have to work at home. So all got the privilege of education during the Elizabethan period. Now coming to the language, I am discussing in brief because we have to take care of the time also. Language. English language and vocabulary are different from the modern English language that is used nowadays. During the Elizabethan era, words were constantly developing and vocabulary was expanding. Expand means बढ़ना, फैलना. For example, Shakespeare invented many of the words that he used in his plays. It is said that he created more than 2,000 words, more than anyone else. Although there were many new words, language and vocabulary were not formalized. There were not any available dictionary, therefore, in those days. Words were written in many formats. For example, take the name of Shakespeare, the greatest dramatist. Shakespeare, whom we write these days Shakespeare. It is another thing that even the PG students, they leave, most of them leave the last E, that teacher समझ जाएंगे. So Shakespeare was written in many ways, such as Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakkespeare. So in different ways, 3 examples I have given how Shakespeare was written. Now coming to the theatre thing. Theatre was also a growing industry during this era, and the person who has taught you Elizabethan drama must have taught you that during this period so many theatres were established in the suburbs of London, because theatres need a very big place. People from different spheres of life, they come to enjoy theatre, and a big place is needed. So most of them, Rose Theatre, they were established in the outskirts of London. Theatre was a growing industry during era, and for this reason, many theatres arose around London. Entrepreneurs and actors were lured by money and fame, and they started working in this business. The new tragedies showed blood and violence on stage. Tragedies written during the Elizabethan period, you see in Hamlet, Macbeth. Blood and violence on stage, contrary to the philosopher's ethics. Consequently, this kind of violence was perhaps more cathartic for the Elizabethan spectator. Now, coming to poetry, at the end of the 16th century, English poetry was characterized by the development of language, an extensive allusion to classical myths. The three most prominent poets of the, I won't discuss in detail, only in 2-3 lines. The three most prominent poets of the time were John Lilly, Philip Sidney, and Edmund Spencer. They wrote prose also, plays also. Although Elizabethan poetry has been in the background, there are some people that considered that the best lines were written during this period. I repeatedly am asking you to remember that Elizabethan period is known mostly for its drama, then poetry and prose. Now coming to the characteristics of Elizabethan age. You know, all age has its own advantages and disadvantages. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
In our grandmother's age, girls were not sent to school, so they learned the basics of life, how to sew, how to do embroidery, all so many things. That was the advantage. In our age, we have got college education, school education, we have got mobile technology, everything, but reading, when mobile and internet were not available, reading was a very good habit for people who were educated. Now these days, the disadvantage is that in the last class somebody asked me, Madam, page number, W.J. Lonka, everything you want on the platter. So this is the disadvantage. So all the A's, they have their advantages and disadvantages. This is the modern age is full of tension. This is the age of anxiety. So depression is a very common word these days. In our mother or grandmother's time, it was not known. Counseling. So what were the characteristics of Elizabethan age? Queen Elizabeth I ruled over England. This you have to remember always. The time 1558 to 1603. 1558 to 1603. Her era was a dynamic one, filled with a thirst for adventure, the development of new ideas, and the flourishing of literature, prose, poetry, and drama. You know that these days engineers are coming out in thousands, but research is not done. So many new things are not developed. Their aim only is to get a corporate job and then mint money. So the development of new ideas, flourishing of literature, prose, poetry, and drama. The Elizabethan age was characterized by a renewed spirit of adventure and discovery and a renewed attention to older sources of knowledge. In literature, the Petrarchan sonnet was import-export, and modified by Shakespeare, creating what is now called the Elizabethan sonnet. Let us look at some of the important characteristics. Only 4-5 I would discuss. There are a number of characteristics, but we have to discuss only the important ones. First characteristics you can say, Elizabethans were prolific in their writings. Plays, poems, pamphlets, treatises and other works were created in abundance. Plays, poems, pamphlet, parcha, treatises, sandhi and other works were created in abundance, in numbers, widely circulated and freely read and discussed. Just think of Shakespeare's work alone to illustrate this point. This great dramatist and poet wrote 37 plays and 154 sonnets, as well as other works including the Phoenix and the Turtle. So this was the first characteristic. The second was Elizabethans returned with gusto to the classics, piche lote, they returned back to the classics of Greek and Latin. In my normal class at CM College, I have often discussed that before English became popular, Greek and Latin were the most respected languages, and most of the works of the great authors were in Latin or in Greek. They were the most scholarly languages, as in our country, Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit were the most read and used languages in the olden times. So Elizabethans returned with gusto to the classics of Greek and Latin and made them their own. As part of the Renaissance movement, Elizabethan writers delved into the history and mythology of the classical past and created new works that explore and adapted classical themes. Explore means खोजना, उस पर मंथन करना, and adapt is अपनाना. Explored and adapted classic themes or classical themes. Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar is a fine example of the new classicism. The third characteristic I am going to discuss is that Elizabethans dared to reach out in new directions into the world of romanticism, where they plunged into the adventures, wonders, and beauties of the supernatural. Supernatural, you know, I hope. Supernatural is not related to this world, paralaukic, which is not natural. Paralaukic, not related to this world. So, they plunged into the adventures, wonders, and beauties of the supernatural and the natural world. We may think again of Shakespeare and his play, those who have read it, A Midsummer Night's Dream, in which fairies abound and all sorts of fantastic events occur. Have any one of you read Midsummer Night's Dream? No. It is full of adventure. There is a curse that if a flower juice is poured in the eyes of the sleeping queen, she will fall in love with the man or animal who comes first in her view. There are many adventures, fairies are there. Most of the scenes happen in a forest. The fourth characteristics, all the abridged versions of Shakespeare's plays are also available. Abridged is sankshipt, chota kiya hua, in the story form. Previously in Inter, there was a book prescribed, Shakespearean plays. We used to teach it in the class. You all should be acquainted with, though not in course, the other works of Shakespeare also. Fourthly, Elizabethans developed their scholarly side as well. Many of them, including the Queen herself, worked on translating the classics of Greek and Latin into English, because more and more people knew English. They were not acquainted with Latin and Greek. So even the Queen and the scholarly people, they devoted their time in translating the works, the classics of Greek and Latin into English to make them more and more accessible to the masses or to the public. The last characteristics I would like to discuss is the Elizabethans were an independent lot. They were not guided by others. They may have borrowed from the classics, but they used what they borrowed in new and creative ways. Though they borrowed the stories from the classics, but they added their own imagination and used it in a creative way. Shakespeare and Spencer, for instance, they developed sonnet forms of their own. Just now I told you that sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet, was imported from Italy, and Shakespeare, with some change, adopted it, and now it is known as Elizabethan sonnet or Shakespearean sonnet also, you can say. He wrote 154 sonnets. So they developed sonnet forms of their own. Spencer, Edmund Spencer, and William Shakespeare. The stage exploded with diverse plays that pushed boundaries. Prose works expanded as writers adapted the English language to a wide variety of needs. Indeed, the Elizabethans exhibited a scope of imagination and ingenuity that keeps us fascinated with their works for generations. And this is the example that even in the 21st century, we are reading plays by Shakespeare and Marlowe. So they made that popular, their works, that it is still popular in the field of or in the world of literature. Now coming to the point, Elizabethan prose, which we have to do today. During the 15th century, just before the Elizabethan period, during the 15th century, Latin was the medium of expression, and almost all the important prose works were written in that language, Latin. Latin is supposed to be a very difficult language. I have a dictionary, Latin to English. So all the important works were written in Latin. It was in the 16th century, particularly in the second half or the later half of the 16th century, that the English language came to its own with the arrival of cheap mass printing. English prose, before that, printing was very difficult and expensive. So with the arrival of cheap printing presses, English prose became the popular medium for works aiming both at amusement and instruction. The books which date from this period, they cover superb learning. Though the prose used by these numerous writers is not exactly the same or the similar. Different people have different thinking. So their work is not exactly similar, yet we come across a basic characteristic common to the works of all. There are dissimilarities and there are similarities too, because of the age, because they all were contemporaries. So what was common to the work of all? That is the nearness of their prose to poetry. Their prose was influenced by poetry, and the language of the prose also had poetical elements in it. The age, says G.H. Mayer, the age means the Elizabethan age, was intoxicated with language. It went mad of a mere delight in words. Its writers were using a new tongue, for English was enriched beyond all recognition with borrowings from the ancient authors, and like all artists who become possessed of a new medium, they used it to the excess. During my father's time, ornamental English was very famous or liked. People used to write, they used to pick up heavy words, difficult words, but very, these days Sasi Tharoor is famous for it. There are jokes also related to Sasi Tharoor's English, very difficult words and not commonly used. That was known as ornamental English. As English was a new language after Latin and Greek, so they experimented with the English language, and that was the common thing among all. The language was rich. Now the 21st century, we like and we use simple English so that you understand everything and the words are not unknown to you. So the Elizabethan language was rich, gaudy, and overflowing. A.C. Ward, the famous critic, observes in Illustrated History of English Literature, Volume 1, our modern view of prose is strictly and perhaps too narrowly practical and utilitarian or functional. That is not very useful. Prose, we hold, has a job to do and should do it without fuss, nonsense, or aesthetic capers. Prose has to reach more and more people, but if the language is not very simple, it would not serve the purpose. It should say what it has to say in the shortest, again I am repeating, it should say what it has to say in the shortest and most time-saving manner. But we find Elizabethan prose far from this commonly accepted principle. It is colorful, blazing, rhythmic, and indirect, the language. Rarely does an Elizabethan prose writer call a spade a spade. Directly, they did not attack. They rarely said a spade a spade. I am very famous for calling a spade because in Mithila also, direct thing is not liked. So now coming to the prose, we have to do essay. The prose works of Elizabethan age, again, the prose falls into two categories. One is fiction. Novel falls in the section of fiction. Fiction is where story element is also there. Other is not non-fiction. Essay falls in the category of non-fiction. I will limit my discussion here to non-fiction only in general and essays in particular because we have to do essays. So now coming to this period was very famous for drama and poetry, prose was not very popular, but there are some very popular essay writers. I have left the less known prose writers because we have to cover that, we have to take care of the time also. I would discuss only 5 or 6. So first Elizabethan essayist I would like to discuss is George Gasquen. George normal spelling, Gasquen, Gascoigne. And the period is 1535 to 1577. Gascoigne was a soldier and a poet and entered at Gray's Inn in 1555 and spent more than 10 years there. Among Gascoigne's first significant works is The Supposes, a collection of essays, The Supposes, Supposes, written in 1566, an adaptation of an Italian comedy. It is a story of disguise and mistaken identity. Again, I am repeating, Gascoigne's first significant work is known as The Supposes, published in 1566. It is an adaptation of an Italian comedy story or comic story of disguise and mistaken identity. His another collection, 100 Sundry Flowers. 100 spelling is Hundreth. Hundreth. 100 Sundry, Sundry Flowers, Flowres. See, the spelling is different from the modern times. Flowres, published in 1573, was originally published under the guise of an anthology representing the works of several authors, though it was written entirely by George Gascoigne. Many scholars consider this ploy a sophisticated literary device that serves to focus on the art of rhetoric and the playfulness of reading. Subsequent works by Gascoigne, such as one another collection is named The Spoil of Antwerp. The Spoil, Spoyle, The Spoil of Antwerp, Antwerpe. The Spoil of Antwerp, published in 1576, is an account of war atrocities he witnessed in Holland, demonstrate a shift in his writing style which suggests that his concerns had changed from aesthetic innovation to stout moralism. Ultimately, however, Gascoigne is recognized for his ability to write about a variety of subjects from a wide array of perspectives. He wrote on a variety of subjects. He was not limited to only a few subjects. Thus, in turn, demonstrates his appreciation of language and rhetoric and his aptitude for literary invention. Another important, after George Gasquen, another worth mentioning essayist, I have already said that there are many, but I have discussed only 5 or 6. Edmund Spencer, Edmund, Edmund, Spencer. Edmund Spencer, 1552 to 1594. Excuse me. Spencer was born into a tailor's household in London. His early schooling took place at the Merchant Taylors' Free School, where he received an education considered quite progressive by the standards of the day or the Elizabethan period. In 1569, Spencer entered Pembroke College, Cambridge, receiving, in university which I have discussed to my CM College students that Cambridge and Oxford are the oldest university of England. So he entered Pembroke College, Cambridge, received his bachelor's degree in 1573 and master's in 1576. By all accounts, coming to his works, Spencer's most important work is The Fairy Queen. The spelling of fairy is not normal, Faerie. And Queen, Queene. His most important work is The Fairy Queen. It is a narrative epic of legends and romance. Definitely medieval in conception, but actually more closely related to the 16th century Italian romantic epic. The Fairy Queen is a series of chivalrous adventures. What is chivalrous? Bahaduri. Chivalrous adventures replete with tales of knightly honor, damsels in distress, and evil forces to be conquered. His intent was he wanted to write 12 books, each featuring a central hero or heroine representing one of 12 virtues. Spencer died before he could complete his task. The pervasive allegory of the Fairy Queen is one of its most remarkable aspects. The allegory works principally, this I have discussed in the previous class also, on 2 levels, moral and political. The moral allegory is the most consistent as well as the most clear and accessible. The political allegory is the more obscure. Obscure is difficult, jatil, for the modern reader, given the political complexities of the Elizabethan court. During that period in the court also, politics was not every man's cup of tea. So many conspiracies were hatched, so many things were done, so many killings also happened. So political complexities of the Elizabethan court. Spencer's most notable prose piece, Fairy Queen, is in poetic form. Prose piece is his A View of the State of Ireland. It is the name of a collection of essays, A View of the State of Ireland, written dialogue-wise between 2 characters, Eudoxus and Irenaeus. Eudoxus, Eudoxus, and Irenaeus is Ireneous, written in 1633. It is an essay describing and approving the harsh English policies of subjection in 16th century Ireland. You know that Ireland, England, and Scotland, they formed the Great Britain. They all are still one in some respects. They have some liberty, Ireland and Scotland, but still they are ruled by England. And in those days, it was known as GB, Great Britain. So, It is an essay. A view of the state of Ireland is an essay describing and approving the harsh English policies of subjection in 16th century Ireland. From the 16th century to the 20th, Spencer's work has maintained a place of distinction, very important place, in English literature. The enthusiastic praise accorded to the Shepherd's calendar. This is also a very important book, the Shepherd's calendar. It has waned in recent times, and the poem is now accorded minor status. In those days when it was published, it was very famous, but with time, its popularity has come down. Much of the criticism of his work has concentrated on its allegorical aspects and on Spencer's role as a stylistic innovator. He invented new styles in writing. So we have discussed Gasquen and Edmund Spencer. Now coming to the third essayist, Philip Sidney. Philip normal spelling, Sydney, Sidney. You know Sydney is a place also in Australia. 1554 to 1586, Philip Sidney. Born in Kent to aristocratic parents. Aristocratic, I hope you know. Aristocratic class, we say. Abhijat.
High class society.
Yes, very good. High class society. Abhijat, it is referred in Hindi. Yes. They don't know the harsh realities of life. Born in Kent to aristocratic parents, Sir Henry Sidney received the financial, social, and educational privileges of the English nobility and was trained as a statesman. Naturally, as he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he received the best financial, social, and educational privilege of the English nobility, noble people, and was trained as a statesman. Sidney matriculated at Christ Church, Oxford. In those days, most of the people in university, which you have seen, that out of 7, 4 went to one place, Oxford and Cambridge. So Oxford and Cambridge are the oldest universities. Sidney went to Christ Church, Oxford in 1568, where he studied grammar, rhetoric, and religion. He left 3 years later without taking a degree, possibly due to an outbreak of plague that forced the universities to close temporarily. This problem we are facing now, at that time he could not take his degree and was forced to leave the university because temporarily, due to the plague, it was closed. Now all the things are closed due to this deadly COVID. We have lost so many near and dear ones in this second phase, and we hope the third phase never comes and we all at least stay safe and sound. Mentally also we are very much disturbed. So the same problem was there university in the plague time that forced the universities to close temporarily. Sidney continues his education with a grand tour of continental Europe. You know, taking a tour, it also is very beneficial to your knowledge. We Indians, especially Biharis, we are not very fond of traveling. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. We get money, we start thinking, I still live in a rented house. I will do this. I have 3 sons and I have made houses only for 2 sons. Let us do things. Adventure and touring is also an important part of our life. Yes, Aryan Bhatt likes, I am very fond of traveling. Very good. It is also a great teacher. If you travel, leave abroad. Only from my wish is to travel after retirement from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. I love my own country. Somebody is writing, हमें मौका नहीं मिलता है. You are very young, my dear. After completing your education, start earning and don't ask anybody. Do what you like to do. I am not advising you to smoking and drinking, but if you wish to travel, travel that. Foreign people, English people, they ask their girls and boys to travel. So traveling also, so many, Oliver Goldsmith had no degree. That dramatist whose work is in degree to see stoops to conquer. He traveled with a flute only. He had the art of playing the flute. And people used to give him money. In that, he met Dr. Samuel Johnson, who became his mentor. So traveling also reaches your uh, information, your knowledge of the world. These days also I have read many IITians, they have not allowed their sons and daughters to attend school, and they are traveling a lot. Life in itself is a school, and how to earn money while traveling, how to stay in a muddy house, and if you get chance, stay in a 7-star hotel. All these are part of life. I remember one of my juniors when I was in hostel. Now she is in contact with me thanks to Facebook. And once she had asked, Manju Didi, chuda ka ped hota hai kya? And then we started calling her, wo chuda ka ped wali ladki kahan gayi? So we are so ignorant, traveling so many students or um, uh, children who have not visited any village, they don't know from where the rice comes, the pulse came, or the fruit comes. But these days, people are coming to farming also. So he toured a lot. As the university was closed, he toured a lot of continental Europe, learning about politics, languages, music. See how many things he learned. Politics, languages. If you don't have the language, at least the basic, you can't travel. Then music, astronomy. Astronomy, reading of the stars, geography, and the military. You read, if you are on social media, you read somebody is traveling on bicycle, some on motorbike. I have read someone walked on foot to so many countries. And people helped him. Mostly people help. So, politics, language, music, astronomy, geography, and the military. During this time, he became acquainted with some of the most prominent European statesmen, scholars, and artists. He also became friends with the humanist scholar Hubert Langet, with whom he spent a winter in Germany. Sidney's correspondence with Langet, though as they became friends, he kept on writing him, is a valuable source of information about Sidney's life and career. Then Sidney returned to England in 1575, where he promptly established himself as one of the courtiers of the Queen's court. Although he pursued literary interests, Sidney's chief ambition was to embark on a career in public service. He also began writing the first version of Arcadia. It is a very famous book, Arcadia, a long pastoral romance. Probably in 1580, he completed the old Arcadia and began the other book, The Defense of Poesie, Poesie. He began Astrophel and Stella, another book, around 1581. Sidney began a major revision of the Arcadia in 1584, and in the following year began working on a verse translation of the Psalms. Psalms are religious books, which was later finished by his sister. Drawing on elements of Italian pastoral romance and Greek prose epic, the plot of the Arcadia concerns two princes. What is the story there? Two princes who embark on a quest for love in the land of Arcadia, fall in love with two daughters of the Arcadian king, and eventually, after a series of mistaken identities and misunderstandings, marry the princesses. Elaborately plotted with a non-chronological structure interspersed with poetry and characterized by extensive alliteration, similes, paradoxes, and rhetorical devices, The Arcadia is artificial, extravagant, and difficult to read by modern standards. The defense of poesy responds to Stephen Goson's school of abuse, which charges that modern poetry exerts an immoral influence on society by presenting lies as truth and instilling unnatural desires in its readers. Sidney answered these accusations that the poet provides a product of his imagination, which does not pretend to literal fact and therefore cannot present lies. Sidney declares that the purpose of poetry is to instruct and delight. So various critics contend that the creativity and concern for literary detail intrinsic in Sidney's prose style in the New Arcadia were valuable experiments or innovations, you can say, which encouraged experimentation and greater attention to craftsmanship among Renaissance writers. Now coming to a less known prose writer, Richard Hooker. Then we will do the most important, Francis Bacon, lastly. So Richard Hooker, 1547 to 1600. Hooker's masterly work is known as Of the Law of Ecclesiastical Policy. Is the greatest of the non-fiction prose work of the Elizabethan race, of the laws of ecclesiastical policy. It began appearing volume by volume. There were so many volumes in 1594 and continued till the author's death. It was the first book in England which used English for a serious philosophical discussion. Hooker was a Protestant. You know, in Christianity there are divisions, Catholic, Protestants, Anglicans. He was a Protestant who combined the piety. Holy Cross is run by Protestant nuns. Protestant who combined the piety of a saint with the simplicity of a child. His purpose in writing the book was to defend the Church of England and to support certain principles of church government. You know, in England, in Miracle Mystery, I taught you that church is very important. Church has a hold over the government. Hooker modeled his style on Cicero, Cicero. Though his diction is simple, yet the syntax is highly Latinized. He followed the Latin words, but now without much harmony. Not without much harmony and studied flow. There is a flow in his writings. The style is as much removed from vulgarity. There is no vulgar words there. Ruskin was later to seize upon this style, John Ruskin, and used it in his earlier works, particularly the book Modern Painters is by John Ruskin. Now coming to the most important, in degree 2, you have so many essays written by Francis Bacon. In degree 2, you will see. Then you will remember, ma'am, ye padhayi thi, Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is the most important essayist of the period. 1561. He was born in 1561 and died in 1626. Bacon, it is the last essayist I am discussing. Bacon is widely accepted as an advocate of the scientific method and the father of the modern essay. In both areas, he relied on systematical, empirical thinking in order to further understand nature and social interactions. He helped create the scientific method of strict observation and inductive reasoning in his essays. Bacon was a member of the British Parliament, so he was an MP, a jurist, a philosopher. In these capacities, he used the scientific method to organize his thinking. He organized knowledge into 3 groups. What are the groups? History, poetry, and philosophy. And studied them from the point of view that information is processed through memory, reason, and imagination. Again, processed through 3 things: memory, reason, and imagination. Bacon first published his essay in 1597 and published later editions in 1612 and 1625. His essays are written in a logical and systematic way. Some students are writing about Bacon, very good that they know the essayist. His essays are written in a logical and systematic way, approaching their subjects from a variety of viewpoints, comparing them, and writing in clear prose, often employing aphorisms to concisely make a point. He covered such topics. His topics are very interesting. Please see. He covered such topics as truth, love, death, marriage, education, religion. All these are very important in our lives. Child rearing. बच्चे तो सब पल जाते हैं, but how to rear a child. Health and good and evil, to name only a few. There is a huge range of his essays. Francis Bacon is often credited as the first great English essayist. I am repeatedly telling you. He published his book of 10 essays in 1597, followed by a book of 38 essays in 1612, and finally a volume of 58 essays in 1625. Bacon's essays often examine abstract topics, जो आप देख नहीं सकते हैं, such as love, friendship, truth, and anger. He is considered an early empiricist and proponent of the scientific method of testing hypotheses in an objective manner. In his essays, he liked to view issues from different perspectives and in a detached way. In his essay, there are different essays. I told you in degree 2, you will come across such essays because they are in your course. In his essay on anger, he lists different causes of anger, then focuses on 3 causes, then offers solutions. एकदम तह तक जाते हैं वो. His essays are always rational and analytic. He borrowed the concept of the essay from the French writer Montaigne, 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 whose essays first appeared in 1580. So this you have to remember, that he borrowed the concept of an essay from the French writer Montaigne, whose essay first appeared in 1580. In spite of the fact that Bacon took them lightly, his essays make pretty heavy reading. They are full of memorable incidents which have passed into everyday speech. Some of the memorable quotes I would like to quote, which you must have come across, but that time perhaps you are not aware that they are Bacon's lines. Some of the quotes, lastly, I would like to quote. We have 15 minutes. Sorry. Yes. It was disconnected by my mistake. I touched the mouse. So, Bacon's lines I am quoting. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
See,
Yes, ma'am.
lines you will come across in degree 2. From his essay of studies, there are lines. Some books, pay attention, some books should be tasted, some devoured, but only a few should be chewed and digested thoroughly. Again, I am repeating, some books should be tasted, some devoured. Tasted, खाली स्वाद लेना, devoured खा जाना, but only a few should be chewed, एकदम चबा जाना, and digested, पूरी आत्मसात कर लिया, digested thoroughly. These lines come from Of Studies. Another is from the essay The Advancement of Learning. The lines are, if a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. You start, suppose you start a work, you think, कैसे होगा, क्या होगा, but if you want to be certain in the beginning, it is not possible. You have to start with doubts. Then only he shall end in certainties. Another is a very good quote I often quote: hope is a good breakfast. They say, I don't remember. Hope is a good breakfast, but it is a very bad supper. The word supper is not used these days. But I hope you know this word supper.
Yes, ma'am. रात का खाना.
Yes, रात का खाना. When we were kids, we were taught दिन का खाना dinner और रात का supper. But now dinner has ousted supper. उसको धकेल दिया है. Christ's Last Supper is also very important. Before his crucifixion, there was a Last Supper. So hope is a good breakfast, but it is a bad supper. Next line is: a wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. A wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. जितना मिलता है उससे ज़्यादा अवसर. You have to grab. Next, read not to contradict and confute, not to believe and take for granted. ये नहीं कि जो पढ़ लिए that is right. Not to find, talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. You have to read and you have to weigh those words. You have to consider. Again the same lines from the Advancement of Learning. Some books are to be tested. Nowadays, students don't like the book to be tested or even to smell the book. Notes and guides and Rekha passports, they do everything. Some books are to be tested, others to be swallowed, and some to be chewed and digested. The history book you have to chew and digest. That is, some books are to be read only in parts. It means to say some books are to be read only in parts, other to be read but not curiously, and some to be read wholly and with diligence and attention. पूरा एक word ध्यान से. So, next quote is: imagination was given to man to compensate him for what he is not. A sense of humor to console him for what he is. Next, begin doing what you want to do now. As somebody said, I want to travel, but we are not allowed. But the moment you start earning, begin doing what you want to do now. We are not living in eternity. We have only this moment, sparkling like a star in our hand and melting like a snowflake. Suppose we elderly people think, I have though traveled a lot as my husband was abroad